Everybody's here, Richie. You're here. Okay. Here's Amanda. All right. Good day, everybody. We're going to get started here. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows the routine. We're going to be talking about 5 to 6 minutes apiece, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience, and then we'll move forward with hopefully answering. The process is going to be Ananda back there. If you can raise your hand. Ananda will come to you, get the question. We're going to take the questions in groups of 3. That way we can, I will emphasize the word question, not statements. Okay? We're not here for that. We're here to answer questions. All right, let's get this show rolling. So welcome, folks. My name is Jose Bravo. I'm Executive Director of the Just Transition Alliance, an alliance in the United States, Canada, and Mexico that does work around just transition. And we came together in 1996 with what was the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union that made, as they referred to us, everything from a BB to a nuclear weapon, 90,000 chemicals, and fuels, the fuels that transport us from here to there. We set upon ourselves to start what is now known as the Just Transition Alliance, and some of these folks are here from part of our Just Transition Alliance. They're part of our delegation that we're bringing from the United States. And what we're going to do today is listen to folks' perspectives on just transition, right? I want to mention, like I've said before on 3 other panels at this COP, that no just transition is the same. We do not have a cookie cutter where we can say, here is the model of a just transition. No, communities and workers come together and develop a just transition from the bottom up using rank and file understanding and community organizing. And at the same time, I want to mention that if we are at the table talking about a just transition and all there is environmental justice organizations, that's not a just transition. It has to include workers, and vice versa. If we're at a table and it's only workers at the table and not those communities that are at the fence line of harm, then it's not a just transition. And why did we come together with workers? Because regretfully, the workers are our canary in the coal mine. If they get sick on their jobs, if there's explosions, if there's events, as they're called in a very sanitized way, what we see then is that chain link fence is not going to protect us. So it's in our best interest to have the workers be healthy and safe, and a health and safety worker also means a health and safety community. A health and safe community, sorry. So what we're going to do is ask people to come up and speak. We're going to speak from the podium here. Again, 5 to 7 minutes at most. And then, Richie, I didn't bring the list of speakers. So, oh, it's there. Okay. So the first speaker, me. The second speaker is our dear friend who works in a refinery in Los Angeles, California. And he will come, Norman Rogers, he will come and share some of the worker perspective and wisdom with us. Please, Norman.
Thank you, Jose. So wisdom, it's a tall order.
With the mic closer to you.
All right. Can you guys hear me all right? So I'm going to start off with when Jose mentioned about environmental justice and linking that to doing the right thing, because on its face, seeking environmental justice is the right thing. But there exists more than one path towards doing the right thing. For the last 100 years, 150 years in California, oil has been refined, oil has been extracted from the ground and refined, and folks have been able to do the right thing if you judge doing the right thing by putting a roof over their heads and food on the table. And that's been going on for 100 years. And over those 100 years, those jobs through collective bargaining have become good paying jobs. They've had not just pay, but good benefits. There's unbelievable numbers of lawyers and doctors that have come out of these homes because they've been able to afford that kind of lifestyle that supports home ownership, it supports putting your kids through school, it supports piano lessons, all of that. We were actually cursed by that, my facility in 2015, because we were out on strike. And the jobs that we had make it possible for one wage earner to support a household. When you're out on strike, you're not getting those wages anymore. Anyway, that's one version of doing the right thing. The other version is, for California in particular, is meeting the greenhouse gas emission targets. Those things would seem to be on opposite paths. And that's what one of the transitions that we have to make, is showing people that both things can happen, both things need to happen, and that we need to be conscious of how we're addressing folks, because we're inserting ourselves. The environmental justice movement on its own, it's inserting itself between somebody and their paycheck, and that's always problematic. So I wanted to mention that piece. The other piece, and this came to light yesterday, I saw the story. Phillips 66 has made so much money. I'm sorry, Phillips 66 is a refiner, is a refining company. It has operations all around the world. They made so much money that they're forced to get rid of 1,100 people. So a while ago, they were making so little money that they were forced to get rid of people. So I don't know where the magic balance point is in all that. But I mentioned that because I've seen the saying, and I mentioned this at a panel yesterday because it really annoys me, is this together for implementation statement. And if we look at the folks at Phillips 66 that made these decisions, what does together for implementation mean for them? Anybody? It's cutting 1,100 workers. If you're a worker or a community member, what does together for implementation mean? These folks keep their jobs. It means that the refineries run safely. It means that there's no pollution, not just safe, but are environmentally friendly until they can be closed down. So these are all points for transition and fights that have to be fought. When you see, and you're out and about and you see that implementation, together for implementation, keep in mind that the folks that really need to be driving that are the fence line folks, are the folks in the refineries, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that suffer the most when these things start coming out. And it's going to be a big fight, because as I mentioned, the companies can make a ton of money, and they end up having to cut people so that they can return the profits to the stockholders. And
I have to say that the first time that the environmental justice movement participated with labor in several sites, it was about either having a lockout or not being able to achieve a collective bargaining contract for 3 years or longer. And the community then started to rally alongside the workers to participate with them and get to know them. Some of them had gone to high school together, but basically had lost touch. And then as folks started getting more and more understanding of what was happening inside the job site, then we were able to, after 3 years at Trujillo, Arizona, the Portland cement plant, achieve a collective bargaining contract. And in Ponca City, Oklahoma, we also ended a lockout. So next on the mic is Edgar Franks. Edgar is from Familias Unidas por la Justicia in the state of Washington. And I'm very proud to have Edgar here. Edgar was a very, very young person at the WTO in Indonesia. When some of us were asked to go up on stage to talk, sometimes you lead by pushing, right? So we pushed Edgar to go up and talk as a young person on a moving truck and a microphone and a lot of water bottles. So Edgar, please.
So good to be here. My name's Edgar, as Jose mentioned. That was a long time ago. I don't know if I was so young. Maybe I was like 30 something. I don't know if that's young or not. But that was a good experience. I think talking about the WTO, the battle in Seattle happened when I was a young man in 1999. And that was a changing experience, especially with the work that I do now, with is working with immigrant farm workers in Washington State, who have been on the front lines of many different battles, whether it be labor fights, racism, pesticides, climate now. Our union, Familias Unidas por la Justicia, was founded in 2013 by a group of Mixteco and Triqui workers, people from Oaxaca and Guerrero, Mexico. They were displaced for the most part by many structural things like the WTO, by NAFTA, and all these things. So ended up in Washington State having to sell their labor. We think about the United States when people are migrating that, the North is like the place where you can make the most money. And everything is going to be good, but when we get there, it's totally different. The cost, the pain of your life, your culture, your dignity, all that comes with a cost, of trying to make a paycheck. So, as farm workers, we feel that pain and have been trying to push back on how do we change that. So, when we first came to this concept, idea, this framework, this practice of a just transition within a union organizing context, it made perfect sense. Farm workers do not have a lot of the labor protections a lot of unions have. They've been excluded by racist laws and practices since the 1930s. And those same laws are existent right now. So the farm workers don't have the benefit of being covered by the National Labor Relations Act. So we have to fight. We have to struggle for everything that we get. One of the things that we were able to do, despite all these challenges, was win a union contract and win recognition for farm workers. It was the first union to be recognized formally in over 30 years in Washington State, in the United States. So it's a rare thing that happened. So, at that time, we didn't know, in 2016, we were kind of getting familiarized with just transition, but going from a perspective of an exploited worker to an organized community of workers, that was the beginning of a just transition. And, and I think building that momentum and kind of like bringing in all the culture and the knowledge that people had, especially about working the land and the damage that was being on the land, even working under a union contract does not guarantee you protections of your health and of your community. So the workers themselves started to, organize and having discussions and opening up the space about, okay, we got a union contract, we have some kind of financial security and some kind of a pathway now for workers to live better. But union contracts can also go away. What is something that we can build that can be permanent where we live and that we can use our knowledge and our history of agriculture and farming. So through that, from transitioning from exploited workers to organized workers with a contract, now we're in the process of building worker-owned cooperatives in Washington State. And that's kind of like a continuation of the just transition of proving to the area where we're from, which is all dominated by big agro, like 1,000-acre farms of monocrop agriculture, that has been put at risk. Our food system in Washington has been put at risk now because of climate change. This last couple of years, there's been historic wildfires and smoke and record heat waves, which has basically devastated a food system. And workers have been at the forefront of dealing with the impacts of that. However, we know that that method of farming and agriculture is not going to keep us alive. The system of agriculture that we have right now in the United States, it's not to feed people, it's not to feed for communities, but it's for exporting and it's for profits. I just saw right now a panel discussion where they were talking about climate adaptation, but the people that were presenting were like these big corporations, like seed propriety, like intellectual propriety, beer companies. Like they're looking at climate in a whole different way than and adaptation and survival than farm workers are. So I think with the knowledge and experience that we're experimenting in this thing about how we push back against that monocrop industrial scale agriculture to something that we can use our history and our knowledge and our culture to bring back agroecological practices, traditional knowledge, food sovereignty, and also build up a new economic system. We believe in the solidarity economy system, where we can each have enough and provide for everybody else under a different worldview that's not based on profit, but on living well. So with that, I know my time is up, but Washington right now is on the forefront of a lot of these false solutions. We just had cap and trade pass last year and it's being implemented and negotiated right now in Washington. And for this next upcoming session in January, carbon capture and sequestration is going to be brought up onto the table. And we just see that as another thing, another barrier that's going to hurt workers because it further commodifies land and it's going to commodify more the lives of workers than our people. So we still have a long fight, as Norman said. We believe that the just transition is the way for workers to organize, build power with communities, and transform the system and have a new economy. So, thank you.
So, owning also the system of production and being part of worker cooperatives is important. It's not just about working for the man. It's also working for the planet and our Mother Earth. And it's a great example that of the folks in the state of Washington. And the folks that Edgar was talking about from Mexico are indigenous people that have that traditional knowledge about caretaking of Mother Earth and understanding, but because of economic necessity, have been working for some of these companies that don't necessarily take care of Mother Earth. So next we'll hear from Sayocla, Kindness, and Williams from the Western Mining Action. I've known Sayocla also many years, and Sayocla has also been an inspiration to us all. She's always been part of the indigenous movement in the United States and has collaborations with people all over the planet. So please, Sayocla.
Sego swawek, Sayocla ni yat, Lurinyanta ni Wagita Loda, Onyote Aga ni E. My name is Sayocla. That translates to being it snows again in English. I am from the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, and I'm here representing my people. But also, I work for the Western Mining Action Network, which is one of the largest networks in North America addressing mining issues. I'm also on the board of directors for the Indigenous Environmental Network, and they're here today. So I want to thank, first of all, the Just Transition Alliance and the Australian Institute for inviting me to speak here today on mining and the just transition. I also want to acknowledge the land that we stand upon is the indigenous lands of the indigenous peoples of Africa. I want to say thank you for welcoming us here. It is good to be here in Egypt. As far as the green energy transition, we say keep it in the ground. Keep all the metals in the ground. We are experiencing a rush in mining globally to meet the demand of the green energy transition. So on the front end of all these false solutions to address, to change from fossil fuel to this green energy, so-called green energy, is mining. So the first thing that has to occur is that we need the metals. And so we need lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and graphite. That's what the states are looking for globally, and the mining companies. And so what we're saying is that we want to keep these metals in the ground, and that there's enough metals globally to meet this need, and that these are false solutions. Mining will not help us meet our Paris agreements, and that many tribes and First Nations and indigenous peoples around the globe are negatively impacted by mining. And so we want to reuse, recycle, remanufacture, and reduce consumption of metals globally, especially especially gold and diamonds, because those are luxury items. 90% of the gold is used for jewelry, which of course is a want and not a need. And so when we mine for gold, there's always enormous impacts to the land and the water. So especially in gold mining, they use what's called sodium cyanide, and they do a heap leach cyanide method, which they put sodium cyanide on heaps of earth, ore that they took out of the ground. And what that does is it creates acid mine drainage in the end. And so rivers and water is contaminated, and sometimes, especially, they need to use perpetual water treatment. So I wanted to just explain a little bit about the process of mining and what it is for those who have never been to a mine. It's digging holes in the spirit and the flesh of Mother Earth. So first of all, when a mine comes in, they have to blast the earth. They have to log it and just clear the surface off. Then they use water by the millions of gallons daily to keep the mine site clean, free from water, so that it's dry and so trucks can go in. So it's large-scale mining that's occurring nowadays and destroying the earth in big, massive open pits, but also mountaintop removal. And I know in the Amazon, they're still doing a lot of artisanal mining, which does affect the rivers. And so when mines come in, they create a lot of violence locally. There's community division. There's missing and murdered Indigenous women. And mining itself, there's, in this setting, in the UN setting, they've always talked about mining is, there's an argument, is it sustainable development or is it unsustainable? We know for a fact it's unsustainable development. You cannot call mining development because it's really total destruction. So our just transition is land back, first of all, for Indigenous peoples. We also want to keep it in the ground, keep the metals in the ground, and find a different way to address climate change, especially with the emissions, reduce the emissions. And then also I wanted to just have you go to your special place in your mind and remember what that special place is like. So is it a meadow? Is it a valley? Is it a stream or a river? Or, remember that place, because those are the places we're trying to protect, our homelands, the sacred places and special places that you at home in your community also want to make sure that is protected. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so when we talk about that, we ask you all to also be in alliance and help us and be in solidarity with us, even though where mining takes place is often in remote areas, like it's way up in the mountains, it's way out in the desert, it's places that we can't see. And so we want you to always remember that what takes place like in hidden valleys and hidden places, please care about that as well. So I thank you all. I'm gonna stop for there right now. I think that's all I want to say.
So on the way here to this panel today, I saw a booth with there were some polar bears that were supporting nuclear energy. That's ridiculous and absurd. And not only that, that's part of the genocidal process happening to indigenous communities that are targeted around uranium mining. And then the uranium waste are also targeted to go into indigenous communities. So we must say no. And we stopped and had a conversation with people at that booth and said uranium is not a just transition. And they said, well, you put it's part of the ground, it's natural. And then we said, how about the uranium waste and the 15,000 mines that are leaking on the Navajo reservation? And they said, well, you can always put it back because it's natural. No, you can't. You're stuck with it. And there's nothing natural about taking uranium, enriching it, and then putting it in a process for energy. The best way that we can do in order to cut carbon emissions is like what Sayokla said, is leaving things in the ground, leaving fossil fuels in the ground. But we also have to be very cognizant of the fact that we're now here in a green bubble. Some of that green bubble is not a very good bubble. It's a dangerous bubble. And some of that bubble also needs to be worked a little bit better, because I'll tell you, when we're talking about electric vehicles, a lot of our communities can't afford those electric vehicles. So we should be talking about non-polluting mass transit being free for everyone. And if you want to know where the money could come from for that, you take the money from the company's subsidies from governments and redistribute. Otherwise, for us in the United States will never achieve its goals. Next, we will hear from Dr. Mahendra Kumar from Pacific Elders Voice. Please, Doctor.
Thank you, Chair, fellow panelists, and thank you to Just Transitions and Australian Institute, the Australian Institute, for the invitation to share a few thoughts. The little word about myself, I think most people probably would not know me. I come from the Pacific. I'm actually from Fiji, but I'm wearing a badge of the Marshall Islands. But we are all a big Pacific family, covered by, of course, surrounded by large oceans. I support a group called the Pacific Elders Voice, which has been modeled along the line of the elders, which was initiated by ex-President Nelson Mandela. So as that particular group of elders constitutes some very well-known world leaders, ambassadors, former secretary generals, and so on, in the Pacific we have our own former leaders, political, academic, community leaders who have been active, But because of the nature of politics, once you are not in power or you have retired, but still have a lot of wisdom left, and I think they have gotten together to provide advice on issues which is important for the development of the Pacific people, particularly, but of course it is relevant to the globe generally. The Pacific Elders' Voice is the key focus area is security and in particular climate security. And I think we were conceived about a year ago when the geopolitics of the Pacific region, where we had the big powers trying to position for influence, really for military and defensive reasons. And the Pacific people kept on reminding them that, hey, the biggest threat to our survival is not militarization or having more defense money, but really climate. And climate change was the biggest threat, still is. And climate security, includes the various dimensions, oceans protection, governance, migration, ethical leadership, gender, nuclearization. The Pacific has a history of where nuclear bombs and arsenals were tested on the people in many of the countries, and we are still living with that kind of legacy. So, and the rights of indigenous people and so on. So the Pacific Elders' Voice is basically to provide this kind of voice, not necessarily in contradiction of what the government is doing, and I would like to complement that, but of course, as an independent group, they speak on issues which both governments and the international community should do. So I'm sure most of you are aware of the vulnerability of the Pacific Island countries. They are very small island countries which are regarded as some of the most vulnerable in the world, and they are very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, particularly sea level rise. The Pacific comprises 3 of the 4 atoll countries in the world, and these atoll countries are distinguished because most of them are barely 2 meters above sea level. So if one looks at the projections of the sea level rise, which is quite dire, some of them will have about 70-80% of their total land areas submerged in the next 50 to 100 years. So the threat really is existential. So one of the things I think we obviously want to bring to the international community is the need for a transition where the big polluters who are emitting greenhouse gases, utilizing but majority of the resources, of course, are aware of the obligation to the impacts which some of the Pacific nations, small island countries are facing. Maybe I should just begin by picking up from the last speaker who very eloquently talked about the mining aspects. One of the issues which we are now having to deal with is deep sea bed mining. Certainly the Pacific Ocean has become a very attractive for many companies who are now saying to the world or to the countries that, hey, you want to build your resilience, you need money, guys. How do you get your money? Don't just maintain your oceans. We need to look at the minerals which we are not going to get from land mining, like manganese and so on, which is needed, and therefore you should open up your economic zones and let us try and mine these metals which we can sell, get lots of money, and of course build resilience. Now, as Saul had eloquently said, you can't see these mines and so on. I mean, you can imagine the oceans are even worse in terms of you can't even see what the impact of these deep sea bed mining will be. So I think this is one area which we are very cognizant of. Unfortunately, the lure of the 8 carat, the money and so on is so great, and some of the countries are actually signing up to these companies to have explorations where they can start with deep sea bed mining. In fact, we all know, or we even don't know, what the impacts of these would be on the marine environment. The biggest resources we have is our marine environment, the fish, the coral reefs, and so on. And I think this really is opening up a dangerous sort of area if we are really interested in the issue of transitioning to economies using just solutions. The other issue which I just want to touch on, and I'll leave the other technological options to my colleague Richie, who is much more obviously in a better position to do so, is this whole business of carbon capture and storage. As we all know, the issues, oh, sorry, not the carbon capture and storage, but the carbon offsets. Carbon capture and storage, carbon offset, hydrogen economies are now being bandied around as the solutions which will provide us, the Pacific Island countries and other world developing countries, with just solutions. The small islands of the Pacific do not have any fossil fuel resources. We are completely dependent on imports. The only country which has these resources, I must correct myself, is Papua New Guinea. But the rest of the islands of the Pacific, which you see like dots on the map, have no fossil fuel resources. And of course, what that means is we are reliant on that. Now, the richer countries are trying to sell to us this CCS, the hydrogen and carbon offsets as a quick fix to our woes. And I'll just talk a little bit about the carbon offsets. We do also have, or some of the countries at least have, good stock of rainforests. And one of the things which is being done under various schemes, and the Australian government recently has initiated what's called the Indo-Pacific Carbon Offset Scheme. And they've got my own country, Fiji and Papua New Guinea, to sign on to these. I mean, you all know what that involves. What it involves is these countries planting trees, reforesting, and countries like Australia and others trying to get credits for this carbon, which really means that they don't really want to reduce the emissions at source. They just want to get these credits from things which we do. Our point is that for a just transition, we need to do these things anyway. We need to conserve our environment. It's good for the ecosystems, it's good for biodiversity, but it really shouldn't be a kind of carbon colonialism where some of these countries then extract our carbon, use our carbon for getting credits so that it allows them to continue to emit. And I think our goal really should be for them to reduce all the emissions or reduce the use of coal and oil, which is really the root cause of the problem. So, yes. So just to conclude, I think I just want to say is these new technologies which are being bandied are really not the answer to the just transition we are talking about. We do need governments and the private sector to try to look at meaningful ways to try and reduce all the emissions at source, thereby helping vulnerable countries like in the Pacific to deal with the drastic impacts of climate change. Thank you very much.
In the United States, back in 1991, we had a First People of Color Environmental Justice Leadership Summit. And at that summit was a person from the Marshall Islands that was talking already about the devastation that was happening in the South Pacific with all the types of testing, nuclear testing that was happening in and around the peoples of those islands. And we swore solidarity with them. And ever since, they have been part of our delegations as well, coming into the COP and other institutions. So lastly, we're going to hear from Richie Mirzian, who's our co-host with the Australia Institute. And it's a pleasure to introduce Richie to you all.
Thank you, Jose. Fortunately, I don't have the rap music behind me, so I won't have to bust out any tunes. It is an honor to be on this panel. It's an honor to be with such amazing speakers who are laying out what's necessary for a just transition pathway. And I'll be speaking, I guess, to the other side of that equation, which is the false solutions. Because you can't have climate action without integrity. You can't have climate action with false solutions. And you can't have climate action without a just transition pathway. But we've had a barrage of net zero claims being made right here in the COP and since the Paris Agreement. But these have been claims without integrity. These have been claims filled with false solutions, without plans for just transition. And the UN Secretary General just this week called that out, and he said these bogus pledges, especially from fossil fuel companies, are poisoning the planet. That's the harm they're causing if they fool people that we are taking real climate action, that we are actually transitioning to something better. My organisation, the Australian Institute, is an independent think tank based in Canberra, our capital. And every year we ask Australians, what do you think about climate action? What do you think about integrity? And we publish these results. We've been doing it for 15 years. And the latest version, in the Climate of the Nation 2022, asked them for the first time, who's responsible for these net zero pledges? Who should be holding them to account? And 2/3 of Australians said it should be governments. Governments should be holding them to account. But the problem is sometimes it's the governments that are pushing these false solutions as well. And in Australia, we have a system where the government is even certifying it. You can be a massive fossil fuel gas company. You can be exporting billions of tons of gas out of Australia into Japan, into Korea, into China. And as long as you offset, you buy carbon credits for your lights in your building, you'll get a climate neutral certification on your stamp. Tokyo Gas certified climate neutral. This is the problem with where we're going with net zero. This is the problem with false solutions. And it's happening right here as well. Yesterday was Decarbonization Day here. But if you went over to the Saudi pavilion, you'd see carbon capture and storage on full display. A whole bunch of deals were signed between Europeans and gas companies right here in Africa to export more gas to the continent as well. Gas is not part of the transition, it is the problem. And that's what we're being sold here today. We heard about fossil fuel subsidies. Like, where can the money come from just transition? Well, I know my government is giving $11.6 billion per year in fossil fuel subsidies. That's about $7.5 billion American dollars per year. And if you take one technology like carbon capture and storage, and you just take a step back, carbon capture and storage is where you push CO2 down, and you often, the technology came from the oil industry. Ultimately, it was called enhanced oil recovery. Before it got a facelift, before it was rebranded, it was called enhanced oil recovery. And 74% of the projects around the world right now that are carbon capture and storage are still enhanced oil recovery. You push the CO2 down, you push up more oil. You burn that oil, you end up with more emissions often than what you put in the ground. And that's being sold as a solution right here, right now. In Australia, the governments have committed over $4 billion over 20 years for carbon capture and storage. The largest one in the world is in Australia, run by Chevron and Shell and ExxonMobil. It was supposed to start in 2016 and it didn't work. And in 2017, it didn't work. In 2018, not a single ton of emissions was captured, and yet it was pumping out a lot of gas. In 2019, they finally got it working, and then it clogged up with sand. It has never been fully operational, never in its 6 years. And the failure to bury those emissions is the equivalent of a whole year's worth of flights. Like, this is what happens when you back, and the punishment, nothing. If anything, Chevron now has this big plan to take CO2 from Singapore and bring it on a ship to Australia and bury it in Australia. Like, as if somehow that's going to work. As if somehow that can extend the oil and gas industry further. This is what's happening. But here is the opportunity. We're all here now because we're trying to hold our governments to account. For the first time ever, you had this UN report on greenwashing. You have more communities standing up and speaking up about these false solutions. And I can tell you from my country, Australia, it had an election in May, and it kicked out its prime minister, who was like a Trump-like candidate, who wanted to see more gas as a response to the pandemic. We kicked him out, and this new government, which is just right over there, you can go see it at the Australian Pavilion, it says we're under new management. We're under new management and we take climate action seriously. We want to make Australia a renewable energy superpower. But the problem is they also want to have their cake and eat it too. They also want to keep digging up more fossil fuels. There are over 100 new projects, new coal and gas projects in Australia. And to put it in context, Australia exports more fossil fuels than the United States. Only Russia and Saudi Arabia export more fossil fuels than Australia, and they're going to keep doing it. Even though the majority of Australians don't want to see new coal mines, that's what's the plan right now. Now, this new government in Australia also wants to host a COP, and it wants to do it in 4 years' time. Well, this is the opportunity for Australia to reinvent itself. If it wants to be a real solution, if it wants to demonstrate that you can transition, if it wants to take its workers with it, then this is the time to do it, and that requires stopping new coal and gas. This requires stopping the talk around false solutions. This requires integrity in our net zero pledges, and this requires real climate action.
Before we go into questions and answers part of our presentation, I just want to read to you a snippet from a very wise person in the room that's standing back there. His name is Ananda Litan. Thank you very much. He was responding to something that he saw in a newspaper. It says that the UN secretary had mentioned that if we do not do something here at COP27, we will be on the road to climate hell. I will add that road to climate hell is paved at the moment with false solutions. So we're well on our way. So if folks, and Ananda's passing out some hoodwinks, if you don't have your copy, please get it. There's in different languages. If folks need other languages, you could also visit our booth in our number 6 as you come in from security. So we'll open this up if folks are okay with that, for any questions and comments. Our dear friend Ananda will be the person walking up to you and handing you the mic. Remember, what's the operative word? Questions, not comments. And what we'll do is we'll answer from there. You can just turn on your mic if the answer, Richie, Doctor, if you're gonna answer, just answer from there. There's a mic there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. These were really great presentations. Richie, I live in the Gulf South in Louisiana in the United States. Carbon capture is a really big thing. They often point to Australia as what we should model and what we should do. To hear you say what didn't work over and over again, was really helpful. Can you say a little bit more about the communities around the facilities? What impact are you seeing of those communities around those carbon capture? And there was an incident in Mississippi where there was leakage. I don't know if you know anything about the potential for leakage, even if it works. The potential down the road and impact on the community.
Yep, I'll just jump in there. Thank you. It's a great question. We'll start with leakage. Often, and as is the case with the Chevron project for the Gorgon site in the northwest of Australia, in order to get that off the ground, in order for Chevron to strike that deal with the government took on liability for these projects because we're assuming they work. We don't know. We don't have any carbon capture and storage projects that have run for 100 years, so we don't know what happens. And so the liability sits with the public. And when it goes wrong, then these companies are already long gone. And that's the other risk as well. The communities around it have been sold this as a way of extending their opportunity to work on these. Another example is down in Victoria, in the south of Australia, in the Latrobe Valley, where they have brown coal. It's a big brown coal mining site. and it's a big brown coal power generation site. You can't export brown coal, but you can use it for power generation. And they're being told that when their brown coal power stations close down, don't worry, we'll take the brown coal and we'll turn it into hydrogen. It is such a dirty process to turn brown coal into hydrogen. You get more emissions turning the brown coal into hydrogen than if you just burn the hydrogen, the brown coal to begin with. And the only way you could pretend like that's a climate solution is if you said that you were going to bury the emissions. And this is the kind of ridiculous situation we're at. And they're being hoodwinked into this by these companies that say, we'll go ahead and we'll do this and it'll work. And it's not just the companies. Last year, at the Australian Pavilion, I'm pointing because they're over there, but last year, on the first day of the COP in Glasgow, they rolled out a ridiculously large carbon capture and storage montage that Santos, one of our gas giants, had brought all the way to Glasgow to show off their carbon capture and storage plans. It's ridiculous. And they're getting away with it because they often have the support of companies. They're big fossil fuel companies that are behind it, and they're fooling everyone that this is a legitimate technology when it keeps failing. And the fact that the majority is still used to enhance oil in depleted wells is ridiculous. So, you know, it's a serious risk, and I think we've asked people, have you heard about carbon capture and storage? And the majority haven't. This is the other thing as well. We need to get out there and we need to explain that these are false solutions too. And I'm happy to share these results as well. But the majority of Australians haven't heard of carbon capture and storage. But when you do explain it to them, they realise that this is something that's not legitimate, and it shouldn't be the governments that pay for it and subsidise it. It shouldn't be them, the taxpayers, that subsidise it. If these companies think it's worth it, then they should be investing in it themselves. One more example, and sorry if I'm holding the microphone, Jose. When this idea first came around 15, 20 years ago in Australia, it was by the coal companies. And the coal companies said, government, you put in money, we will match it. And they set up a fund called Coal 21. And the government put in all this money, and they said, well, yeah, we'll put a levy on our coal and we'll put it in here. They put this money together, but because there were no real projects, they changed the fund to then just use it for advertising coal on TV at this amazing black rock. That's what they did with the money in the end. They just use it to advertise their fuels instead of actually using it to try and develop the technology, which doesn't work. That's the real risk.
I wanted to also mention that we see the fact that carbon capture is just another way to extend the life of fossil fuels. To keep companies and countries that are already at the lead of production of fossil fuel emission or carbon emissions in that lead, while other countries get to pay for their pollution. So again, I think it's important for all, and I will mention that Khaled didn't mention this, but the southern part of the United States, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, there's over 50 carbon capture permits right now that are pending for these types of businesses. So Khaled, we're with you.
Actually, I would just add to that from the worker piece, being at a refinery, the companies are all jostling for position to see who's going to be the last company standing. And they're having little informational meetings with the workforce, and they're touting carbon capture is going to be how we are able to keep running. Because oil will end, but it's going to be for a while. And it's going to be for a while. It will be much reduced, but it's still going to exist. So, yeah, stories are being told, lies are being told. Because for me, in the Los Angeles space, if you look at it, you get a Google map and look at the Los Angeles space and what the companies talk about doing as far as putting in carbon capture facilities, there's no room here. Even if it did work, the pipelines, the infrastructure that would have to be put in place, the companies aren't going to spend that kind of money. If it does happen, we'll end up as what was just explained, that the government the people end up paying for it. But it's being sold everywhere. It's so
Are there other questions, please? We're eager to hear questions.
I was going to ask a question of the panelists because I know that some of the struggles last year in Glasgow, net zero emissions was really the overarching goal. We heard the Bankers Alliance on net zero emissions. Everything revolved around net zero emissions. We're not hearing as much now, but we're hearing a lot about climate finance. And I know that some of you have been fighting pollution trading on your home fronts. And could you please share a bit about what these falsehoods of net zero emissions really means when it comes down to some of these policy struggles at home?
I'll take a first crack at that really quickly. Can anybody in the audience tell me where the first pollution trading scheme, scam, whatever you want to call it, took place? Anybody know? Remember him talking about Los Angeles? South Central Los Angeles. It was a project that was pushed by the Natural Resources Defense Council in the state of California to actually remove vehicles from the streets that were higher polluting, that were bigger, that used more gas. And guess who owned some of those vehicles? Poor people. The poorest of the poor that could afford a car, those were the cars. And as they took those cars off the road by ticketing and confiscating cars, companies then got to buy those, were able to buy those pollution credits and pollute more in our communities. So the first process like that took place in California. Now we see it here in the UNFCCC, and it's called Red Plus. And it's a land grab as well now. Other folks want to answer that question?
So, just within the last couple of years, there's been this ongoing fight to stop market-based mechanisms to mitigate climate change. Our governor first was introducing cap and trade mechanism in 2014, but because communities organized and pressured him and said that that was not the solution, he kind of took that off the table. Up until last year, he was kind of very forceful on doing something about the climate. Him and some state legislators and senators, in Washington State. They got together and we're following the California model of cap and trade, which we had brought up the example over and over that it's not doing anything like in Richmond and all these other communities to stop pollution, and emissions are actually going up, and it has nothing to do with lowering emissions or phasing out fossil fuels. It was put up to a vote in the House and the Senate, and it passed overwhelmingly. There was a lot of divisions that happened within the EJ and climate movement, justice movement, because everybody was fighting for the dollars. So I think that's been one of the hardest lessons that we saw here, just how divisive, just it's bad for the environment, bad for the people, but also just what it does on the ground level and how relationships get damaged. And when money is put in front and like the power, the struggle to get those funds. So now Washington State has a cap and trade mechanism, which is getting, the details are getting worked out right now. But seeing it like from the outside, just how much influence like gas companies still have, refineries still have, how many loopholes there are. We just see that, and it's coming here again and just hearing it over and over, like these are the solutions, but we've seen it that all the damage that it's going to be doing and has been doing, those are not the solutions.
Hi, half formed question, so see how this goes. Whenever I think about climate change, I always think about decentralization, being able to have local communities develop their own energy and kind of bring power back to the community. But based on some of the conversations here, obviously we can hear mining companies, some of the time when you want to build those solar panels in local communities, that's going to negatively affect the land. So I'm curious, do you think climate change and trying to get to net zero on the whole is something that can empower communities? And if you don't see that happening right now, what do you think are some steps that we could take to make sure, as we start to move to net zero, the benefits are actually felt within communities and it's not just reinforcing existing challenges?
I'll take that on for a little bit, then others can jump in on that. Net zero is a false solution, my friend. If you go down that path, it's a false solution. What it's meant for us is what Edgar just talked about. It has increased pollution in certain communities. And you know whose communities? People that look like us, not white communities in the United States. And there's this movement called the environmental justice movement that basically was established around race, income, political clout, and disproportionate impact and concentration of industries, right? So because of that, in aggregate, some people might be talking that there's lowering with net zero, but in our communities, it's getting worse. It has been getting worse. So when you talk about economies, we believe in economies to scale. We don't believe in globalization to the point where only billionaires make money and other communities are just either what we call in Spanish mano de obra, or the folks that make the products but don't benefit from the products, and then shipped all over the planet. You can't have that. We already have enough of these minerals and heavy metals and other things that we need on the face of the planet. We don't need to dig anymore. We need to reuse and repurpose. So it's important for us to understand that. And net zero is literally another way that the oil companies and many other chemical companies are needing so that they can get an extension, a life extension, to do more pollution.
Along those lines, I was walking past one of the pavilion yesterday or the day before yesterday, and we were talking about how much is a whale worth. And the number came up, it's worth about $30,000. Sorry, it's worth about $30,000 once you've, oh yeah, a whale. It came up that a whale was dead and then processed and was worth about $30,000. And then it was put forward that there was a higher valuation to the whale if it's alive. And that sounded promising. It saves the whales, it's elephants, it's very encouraging. Then it turned out that it was worth more because the estimates had been done. It was worth about $3 million for the carbon it captured. Which means now there's going to be whale canoes. So I don't know how that'll be monetized, but they're coming different way for it. And so that's the net zero fix. This whale, with the carbon it reduces, it processes, this other organization can keep doing what they're doing. With net zero, you can watch a refinery and you can watch it over 15, 30 years, measure emissions, and the emissions won't change. And at the they might even go up. But they'll say we're good because we saved 30 whales. And we'll get to see who has more power, the whalers or the folks that save them. Whale auctions can come to mind. There's all sorts of things that follow the imagination when you get into. But net zero nets us zero.
Thank you very much for the talk. Unfortunately, we are in a very difficult situation. Personally, I feel disappointed with the COP. This is my first COP, and it looks as if it's a display of power, with decisions have already been made. We are just being consulted because we want to be consulted. Decisions already been made. The hard question is, how do we stop it practically? I'm from South Africa. There's a huge problem of overloaded landfills beyond capacity. There's a huge problem of electricity. European banks are coming in with a solution of money, privatization. 10 years from now, we are going to be in a big problem. They've already signed the deal, it's already done. What do we need to do as civil societies to stop this problem? I grew up in South Africa. Now my daughter doesn't even see a butterfly in Africa.
Imagine if there were no organizations holding them accountable, what it would look like. I think it's important for us to know that a lot of what we are talking about on this panel will probably not make the agreement. Not here. It will not. And I think that when we're talking about a just transition, the other day I got a very good education from an elder indigenous woman that said, you know what? Our just transition is back to taking care of the planet. Our just transition should be back to being the steward of the planet and Mother Earth. If we're talking about tinkering with nature, about redesigning nature, we've lost the battle. So I think it's very, very important that communities take back their traditional knowledge and their understanding of being one with Mother Earth. And they can't take that away from them. Anybody else want to answer?
So, the opioid problem in the United States has been going on for years. Years and years and years and years. Our previous political issues have been going on. And folks were dying, homes were being wrecked. It didn't really matter because the communities affected by it were of a certain socioeconomic level. And so it never really impacted the nation, or what we'll call the recession nation. Once it started hitting white families and white homes, then it became, oh my God, there's a drug problem. And then fix the scheme. The folks that are suffering now from the current situation are folks that are experiencing what you're experiencing at home. And where I live, there's folks that live under refineries. The fence line is literally 50 feet away from the refinery, and they're downwind. There's one little hope here. We had a coalition of people come together. Typically the wind goes this way, affects these homes. They have aromas, odors, all sorts of things that are issues. I live in Southern California. There's a thing called the Santa Ana winds. And those winds switch direction and blow back out to sea. And those winds change directions, it hits all the people that in the high wind area. And because of that, this group and this group eventually got together and worked together. Our folks are catching the bus every morning to go through these houses and touch these lawns, got together with those folks and came up with a solution and made their voices heard. So getting back to the right people have to suffer before there's change. I've been to Tonga, and my cousin moved down there to retire. And one of the first places they showed me was this beautiful hotel that sits right at the edge of the shore. Or it used to sit at the edge of the shore. It's underwater now. And I've been to Australia. And I've had, fortunately, it was like 35 years ago, but the barrier reef that I got to see then, that was full of life and color, is dead now. And so these folks with money, these folks who made visualize their happy place to collect stuff about. And I think having them picture a safety deposit box as opposed to a metal or a sheet, maybe that's when it'll be that gets them to go, oh, there's a problem here because the world's not what they think it is. And we all need to keep an eye out when we're here, because that project they're putting across the street, like Sharks Bay, what is that? If you look at those pictures on the fence, does it look like Egypt? Construction-wise, does it look like Egyptians in those pictures? Yachts coming in? Anyway.
Don't get him started. Other questions, please?
Hello. Thank you so much for your words. I had a question about the economic piece, particularly with the food industry coming to communities that have long, or countries that have long been economically disinvested, and offer a carrot and offer a potential infusion of funding. I'm wondering, how do you engage that argument, particularly to those who haven't had funding, kind of prioritize the long term instead of the short term?
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, hi. Yes, as I had mentioned, in fact, currently there is, in the Pacific, the governments, some governments who had been more enlightened have set up large, what they call protected areas, marine protected areas and so on. Large. One thing about the small island states is they have very large ocean masses, which really is their source of livelihood and existence basically. And now there is so much pressure in terms of these partners, so-called partners, companies and so on coming in. The other day I was at the Moana Pavilion, and I'm sure you must have gone past it, where there's a lot of presentations from various countries, various groups and NGOs and so on about the culture, the relationship between the environment and the culture, that sense of threat of climate change. There was a presentation by the government of Kiribati. Kiribati is one of the least developing countries, and it's amazing how some of the geopolitics is now coming into the way of this whole vision about the short-term development, the long-term sustainability of the environment. Kiribati recently switched allegiance from Republic of China, Taiwan to China. And the president was at pains there, stressing why he is now opening up this huge protected area, which is, really quite humongous to the Chinese, who are ready to come and exploit the fish, the marine environment, and then I'm sure eventually probably will work towards a naval base. Now, the reason he's expanding is, of course, they need the money because there's a poor country. They need all the resources to have them develop, to basically provide. And of course, it's a very compelling argument. So one of the big issues, I think, for the international community is to see how they should be able to deal with it. I mean, it is not far-fetched. These countries do need the resources to be able to feed their people, to be able to make sure that they are and they deal with the various impacts and so on. I mean, it's the same argument, I guess, with resource owners who own a lot of Papua New Guinea, Solomons. A lot of these countries have huge forestry resources, and of course, they have been exploited by Asian companies. And now, when you look at this sort of landscape, it's littered with huge areas. I mean, we hear about Amazons, but we don't hear about these things at our scale, at this scale. And of course, the argument of the resource owners is, well, tell us, how do we survive, basically? And how do we you give us the means for us to leave the forest alone, and we'll go along with it. So I think this is one of the huge
arguments and something that the international community should really wake up to. Thank you.
So, to that question again, so they could give money to the countries, but that doesn't mean it goes to the people, right? The countries take it and get it to the businesses that at some point might or might not have an agreement with people about what they want. So they come saying, we will give you this money if you do what we say, right? So planting trees, other things of that nature, nobody's against planting trees. But what we are against is using those trees so that the North, right, like countries like the United States can pollute more. That's what we're against. If we're going to have a just transition, it's going to have to come from the people, and it's going to have to, people are going to have to understand what they want, right? And if that money that's given to other countries is shifted into false solutions, then that's economic extortion. That's not gifting, that's not caring, that's not anything but extortion. Because people need to have the direction that they want to go in and the right to do that. In the United States, we're pushing for free, prior, and informed consent. It's important that we push for free, prior, and informed consent. And it shouldn't only be an indigenous issue. It should be our communities as well. African American, Latino, Asian communities in the United States should have free, prior, and informed consent. So I think it's very important just to, if you want to see what a false solution looks like, follow the money. If you want to see what the real solution is, follow the people.
Oh, just one thing to add on to that in terms of the money. Often you hear, well, we don't have the money to invest in the right solutions, right? We should be taxing the crap out of fossil fuel companies. They're making wartime profits, billions and billions and billions. We should be taxing the things we don't want so that we can actually pay for the things we do. And every developed country, every major fossil fuel exporter out here, every major fossil fuel company that shows its face here should be paying windfall taxes on those wartime profits because they're profiteering off the problem. That's the questions we should be asking. And this is popular in developed countries as much as it is in developing. It's popular across all lines. And it's a big question as to why this is not a major conversation here now.
So something Richie just said is really important, but the proof is in the details. It's tax the profits, right? Because if you tax the product, they'll shift the tax to you. So it's important that you tax the profits.
If not, I have one question for our sister Teo. I'm just,
I'm just giving you a time check. We've got 5 minutes. Sorry.
The last question is, in addition to all the market-based mechanisms and financing, what are the big challenges you're hearing about? Is renewable. Everyone's calling about financing renewable, but we are missing the fact they're calling nuclear and lithium mining and cobalt mining and all this rare earth mining in that cluster. And I wonder how our indigenous communities fighting back. In fact, we could share something.
It's on. Like we talked about earlier, there are a lot of, it's a catch-22 for some of our tribal leaders who are facing the potential for mining in their community or near their community. Mining companies, they want to set up mutual benefit agreements. And a lot of the tribal leaders, that looks appealing because they have poor housing, poor education, they have lack of infrastructure in the community, lack of potable water. They're facing a lot of difficult economic situations. And so the leaders have to decide, do they sign a benefit impact agreement and get some benefits, or um, do they not? Do they resist the mine? And in North America, we don't have the right to say no. Supposedly we have this free, prior, informed consent, but consent is a positive, right? And so um, when it comes to mining, has the first and foremost use of land. And so because it's a priority, we have a difficulty finding it, right? And so do you resist the project, or do you accept the measly scraps that they're giving you because you are in dire financial situation, and your people need housing, your children need education, you need clean water, and so it's a very difficult scenario to be in, and it's something that is different for each community. The decision to accept a mine or to reject a mine, and that is a right of Indigenous peoples. We uphold that right to decide about development. But there is so much coercion, and there's divide and conquer tactics that still exist today. And what our network does is we try to provide information about mining to communities so they have informed information as far as informed peace. And then they can decide for themselves what route is best for them. But it's a hard decision either way, because every decision we make today impacts 7 generations to come. So do we decide to reject a mine and fight against it, or do we sign a mutual benefit agreement and perhaps make the lives of our people a little bit better, or maybe not so much better? Because mining, they'll tell you, the mining companies will tell you, we're going to give you this money and it's going to help your people, but at the same time they're going to leave toxic waste, they're going to leave your land scarred forever, you're going to lose your trap lines, you're going to lose your food sovereignty. Everything is affected. So it's a terrible, terrible scenario, and that's globally. But other times, the mining companies just like, we're not even going to offer you money. We're just taking this land because the governments, the states, gave it to us, and we're going to use it. And it doesn't matter what happens to you people locally. It's not our concern.
I wanted to mention one thing. We got literally like 1 or 2 minutes. I wanted to mention, I want to just acknowledge in the room la compañera Maritza from Puerto Rico. I wish we had enough time to listen to the sister on this panel, because what is happening in Puerto Rico is because of climate change, because of worsening and worsening weather. Puerto Rico is now ground zero for what we call disaster capitalism, making money on disaster. The first set of that I believe happened was in Katrina in New Orleans, where things were privatized, people were moved out, housing was done away with, and gentrification happened at a mass scale. That's happening at the moment in Puerto Rico. And I wish, Maritza, that I would have seen you earlier, we would have brought you up. Thank you all very, very much for joining us today. It's been a learning experience for all of us. And thank you for all your work that you do, and keep up the fight. We're with you. Sí.